Please leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. It was my ex. When we broke up, it was all very dramatic, and he got on a bus across the country the same day for whatever reason, and sent a long message from the bus ending with, "This is not goodbye." I said, "Yes it is, good luck." 2 years later I met my now husband, and I suppose he moved back after 3 years. I started seeing him everywhere. He followed the two of us around Walmart for 45 minuets until I just posted up near a security guard and slipped out as he tried to wait for me to get away from the security guard. Then I saw him wandering around near my mother's house, but I had at that point moved in with my husband. Then I saw him outside of my work. He was clearly trying to get the courage to come in, and he was also very clearly high. Some of the regular police officers came in by chance for their coffee, and he left when they arrived. Then he figured out the general location where I was living, and I saw him sort of wandering around a few times. I didn't go home when I saw him. I went and sat in a public place for a few hours. Then I changed places of work, and I saw him outside about 3 times. I was near a major transportation hub, so I tried to ignore it. But when he started doing the pacing/tweaking/chain smoking thing again, I figured I ought to do something. So I waited for a family friend I knew would be in who was pretty domineering, and I knew would go to bat for me, and let him know who it was and what he was doing. He went outside and told my ex off, I suppose, and scared him, I guess, cause he left quite quickly. My family friend was a bus driver, so I gave him a picture, and he shared it with some drivers along my regular route, and as long as I stuck to that route, the few more times I saw him trying to get on my bus, we drove right past him, or the wrong door opened to let people off and not let him on. We finally moved again, and I quit my job because I had been bouncing around the same chain, and was easy to find. Since then I have seen him once, but he didn't see me, and I think it was unrelated because he actually bought something. I just sat in the camera room and watched till he left. It's been an additional 5 years now, so I assume he has figured himself out. I got an air of doom every time I saw him. He was kind when we dated, never abusive. But he was anti-drugs and anti-smoking, and so seeing him high and things like that set off alarm bells. I know he was not well when he returned. I don't know what would have happened had he gotten close to me. Maybe nothing, but every bone in my body was screaming danger. So I trusted my gut and took steps to maintain distance, and I was okay. The police wouldn't have done anything. No threats were uttered, and we were always in public. But all in all, it turned out okay. Another story I have come across. Last year my girlfriend was getting emails, texts, and DMs from a no-name account asking intrusive and weird questions. Are you in an open relationship? Random sexually explicit stuff. She just blocked and moved on. Shocker to me, this is apparently very normal for women, and it fucking sucks. Anyway, one time we were in a mall, and she noticed this lanky guy was following us. Again, I'm oblivious. She mentions to me that she thinks it's the guy who has been harassing her for weeks. We leave. She gets an email to her business email that night telling her that her boyfriend is cheating on her and flirting with other girls on Goodreads, and how does that make her feel? If she wants to know more, she can meet him at a park that we spend a lot of our time together at. She now knows that he lives in our area and has all the information about her. She stops going for runs at night, she stops shopping by herself, etc. Locks down every account, doesn't leave the house alone. She's just angry. I'm angry too. I ended up looking this guy up and realized that we had a mutual friend. Just an actor that I had filmed a commercial with. I send her a message asking if she knows this guy and explain the situation. I see that she's read it, but doesn't respond. So for a few months my GF doesn't hear anything from him, and we just decide that it's over with. Then I get a message from the actor. Apparently she did know the stalker. It was her ex-boyfriend. They had an abusive relationship, and he was really jealous. I guess he focused in on me because we would recommend each other books on Goodreads. He then decided that he was going to get even with me by stalking my girlfriend. The actor is embarrassed and is saying shit like, "I understand if you never want to talk to me again," which just breaks my heart. We offer to help her out, but she said that she has a restraining order and that it's fine. She did contact him, and he said he'll stop and never contact us again. We thought we were fine, that it was over with. Then, one day he sends me a long IG DM trying to explain his behavior and saying that he wants to talk. I ignore it. He keeps sending messages. I keep ignoring it. I think he's done now. But I'll never forgive this guy for making my partner feel incredibly unsafe for a year. I was new in town, around 15 or 16 years old at the time. I didn't really have parents and was living alone in my uncle's house. I enrolled myself in school and was trying to figure out where the bus stop was. I saw a group of teenagers walking down the road, and a few stragglers were a block behind them or so. I asked one guy who was walking by himself if the bus stop was in that direction. He said yes, and I awkwardly asked if I could walk with him, explaining I was new. I do remember the driver saying something about, "Oh, there's two of you," when we got on the bus but didn't think anything of it. On the ride home, the same guy walked just behind me from where the school bus let us off all the way to my street. He didn't try to talk to me or anything, but just silently walked about 30 foot behind me. I go in my house and noticed he was across the street, sitting on that house's porch swing. Must be my new neighbor, I thought. Then I noticed the same guy walking behind me from class to class in school too. I thought our schedules must be weirdly lined up, where almost all our classes must be next door to each other. Every day he walks behind me. Some days, to make it less weird, I'd say hello and walk with him, and make small talk since we obviously were headed the same direction, but most of the time, he would just walk a few feet behind me. Some days he had flowers for me, and would give them to me, but still not talk to me. Every day I saw him across the street, playing with who I assumed were his little brothers for hours on end. We didn't know each other, probably only spoke to each other a handful of times. Even when he gave me gifts, he never tried to speak to me. He just was always nearby. My best friend from my old town came to visit for spring break. He and I had a lot of fun together, then he went home. The neighbor lady from across the street came over to ask me to tell my boyfriend to stay out of their yard, and said she was uncomfortable with him playing with her son. Assuming she was talking about my male best friend, who had just spent a week with me, I told her no problem, even though I was confused why, or when my friend had ever gone in her yard and played with her kids in the first place. Honestly, I thought maybe she was crazy. Anyhow, late one night, I'm talking to my best friend on the phone, while sitting up against the window in my room, but kept hearing the bushes outside scratching the window, so I used my fingers to spread the blinds and look out to see what the deal was. To my surprise, the guy from the bus was peeping in. Startled, I screamed, and he ran off. I get dressed and huffed over to the neighbors to confront him for peeping in my windows. The neighbor lady answered the door, and I start telling her off for her son being a peeping Tom. Turns the dude wasn't her son. The guy who followed me home every day did not live there, and he was who she was talking about when she asked me to tell my boyfriend to stay out of her yard and stop playing with her kids. We called police. They found him walking several blocks over. We never found out why he was walking behind the group of teenagers the first day I saw him, but he never even went to that school. He had followed me onto the bus. The bus driver had been alerted a new student, me, was starting, and when he got on with me, she made that comment about it being two of us because she thought he was my brother or something. He was full on stalking me, waiting for me outside my classes to walk me to my next class, and spending the times that I was in class at the cemetery next door, hence the flower he often gave me. He was robbing the graves of flowers while I was in math class, then giving them to me while he walked me to science. He wasn't a student. He was a mentally disturbed 19 years old who lived 5 miles away, and had been homeschooled, that I had a chance encounter with that led him to stalking me for 7 months. The police told me they thought he was just a harmless kid in love, but that his parents agreed to send him off for some help. My teachers were notified to be on the lookout, and campus security beefed up for a bit. I guess everyone assumed he was a new student when they saw him in the halls, and since he had been homeschooled, nobody knew him to know he wasn't even high school age. I never saw him after that. It was pretty wild. On top of that, here is another from a friend of a friend. I was a director at a non-profit for individuals with disabilities. We had a lot of great volunteers. One of them was a pretty good guy who always, for years, was super helpful and great with the kids. Always received the Volunteer of the Year award. Kind nice, a bit socially awkward, but seemed like a nice man. Over time, he and I became friends. Not intimate friends, but friendly. He asked me out for a date, and I thought, why not? Date was okay, but I wasn't super attracted to him. We kept in touch BC of the nonprofit. Fast forward, guy starts to offer to help me out with small things at my house. Again thinking, we are just friends, should be okay. I said yes. One day proceeds to show me picture albums of newspaper clippings that he had collected over the years, but all the clippings were with me in them. Then starts to tell me the feelings he's had for me over the past years, and how he can't get over me. At that point I knew there was a serious issue. I had been being stalked, and I had invited the stalker into my home. I calmly and very nicely tell him, as much as I appreciate his help and friendship, I don't share the same feelings. I also told him to seek out a therapist BC, this wasn't normal. I thought he got it, and we part ways as friends, I think. He stopped coming to the place I worked. It was a relief. But I do get a message on my machine from him saying he's seeing a therapist, and maybe if he kept seeing her that we might see each other again. I ignore it. Then he started to show up at my house at night unannounced, offering me money or odd things like a can of paint. He knew I was painting the inside of my house, and that I was struggling financially. I was working for a non-profit and taking care of my disabled brother. I never took the money or the darn paint, told him thank you but no. I also told him he needed to stop coming over or the next time I would call the police. Then one evening I hear something at my back door slider. It's him, of course, and he wants to talk. I notice the door isn't locked. I quickly move to close the lock, but he shoves his way inside and refuses to leave, insisting we talk it out, following me around my house, talking incessantly in circles about our relationship and how it's affected him, how he's seeing that therapist, etc. I call my best girlfriend down the street, whose boyfriend lives with her. I take my brother, leave my house, and go to her place. Dude shows up, of course, and my friend's boyfriend stands in front of me, and my brother with his .45 on his side, and after about 15 minutes of nonsense he leaves. Turns out he went back to my house. I get there, he's upstairs in my room, going through my underwear drawer. I call the police, they get there and try to escort him out. He begins resisting, he punches a wall, knocks over some furniture, won't give up the panties woman facepalming light skin tone, and says on his way out, he needs something to remember me by, and hope you know what you've done. Some time goes by and one day I get a call from a woman therapist who tells me she has been seeing this man BC. He was so distraught after our breakup. She said she was required by law to call me and tell me he told her he had a plan to kill himself, me and my disabled brother. She advised me to take out a restraining order, which I did, and that she gave him a choice to go voluntarily to a hospital or be taken in by police. He spent time in a hospital, and I lived in fear for months after his 30 days in the hospital were up. Had to make repeated calls to get him served. Every night I put 2x4s down between the walls and the doors and on top of the windows, fearing he would break in. I took a new job 45 miles away, put my house up for sale, brought my brother with me. After about a year I felt like I was ready to perhaps start dating. I was pretty isolated in my new place, so I set up a profile online. Within a few weeks, I get a match. There he is, it's my stalker. He made no further contact than a brief message mentioning, "You probably don't date guys like me," but it completely made sense that he would do that. He always felt entitled to me just because of his feelings, when there never was a relationship. My ex, when we were together, I went to my sister's 21st, and it was 5 hours away from where we lived. He wasn't invited and didn't even seem interested. He then spontaneously took a trip with his friend to the city I was in for the 21st. He texted me the address her party was at, which I had never told him, so I believe he was tracking my phone somehow. But thankfully he didn't show up. My dad and brother-in-law would have flattened him if he tried. I spent the night at my sister's flat and was on the phone with him for hours until nearly 5 a.m. He kept trying to convince me to go and meet him and was getting more and more angry. He told me at one point that his friend he came with had taken the car and gone home, leaving him stranded, so he needed my help. But I was also texting his friend, who said that my ex was sitting in the hotel room with him and they were both hanging out. I ended up hanging up and turning my phone off. I slept in my sister's bed with her and her boyfriend because I was so scared. When I woke up I saw he had blocked me on everything overnight, so I assumed we were broken up, but a few days later when I got back to my apartment he showed up with flowers, and I stupidly took him back despite him denying anything ever happened that weekend. Another time I was out of town, he climbed up onto my second-story apartment balcony and got a window open and had his friends round for drinks at my house. And he didn't understand why I was upset by that. When I did eventually break up with him for good, he once again climbed up onto my balcony and got inside, but this time I was home. He was extremely drunk, and he went between begging for me to take him back to throwing me against walls, and even tried to throw me over the balcony. I managed to get a hold of his parents, who came and got him, which made him even more angry, and he tried to run. He did punch his dad, but they managed to get him in the car. I hid in the bathroom closet and broke down, called my mom and had her come get me. I broke my lease, quit my job, and moved to the city my sister lived in. He was blocked on everything and didn't know I had moved, but he kept finding ways to get in contact with me. I eventually went to the police and reached out to him, warning him to back off. A couple years later, he managed to contact me despite being blocked on everything and me having a new phone number. I went straight to the police again, but this time they did nothing. I've done absolutely everything I can to keep myself safe and to assure all my personal information isn't public. I had to get a lot of forms from mental health professionals explaining how important it was my information couldn't be accessed by anyone. I haven't heard or seen from him in a few years, but I'm still getting intensive therapy and live in fear and suffer from a handful of mental illnesses that stemmed from that relationship. Sorry for how long this is. I have another below. This started back in 2019. My life was a bit of an unstable mess at the time for reasons I won't get into in case the person involved in this situation comes across this post. During this turbulent time, someone I didn't know contacted me on my personal Instagram. My account wasn't private, but it had under 100 followers and I don't use tags, so unless you knew me personally, it would be hard to just stumble across. The person who contacted me had created a new account with no identifying information and was not following anyone else. They said they were wondering if they could help me. I asked what they wanted to help me with. They said, "Oh, nothing bad, just help you financially." They then offered me money for nothing via cardless cash or gift cards. They insisted we'd never have to meet, and that they wouldn't get angry or force me if I said no. I refused up front, but they continued to message me, and the language they used made me feel like they knew me personally and or knew my life situation was difficult. I tried to find out some identifying information to figure out who they were, asked if they knew me personally, and when they wouldn't answer my questions, I stopped responding. The following day, they sent me an essay apologizing, insisting they only wanted to help someone in need of assistance, and said they wouldn't contact me again. They proceeded to message me the next day, and the next, and the next. I didn't block them because at this point I was concerned for my safety and wanted to keep access to their messages if I needed to contact police. I'd screenshot and sent the messages to friends, and my partner at the time was aware. After several days of non-stop messages, I told them to stop harassing me, and they deleted their account. A few weeks later, they messaged me again from a brand new account. The timing made me think for sure they knew me personally, as something major had happened in my life again. After some back and forth of telling them to stop harassing me again, they eventually stopped contacting me. 6 months later, they were back with a new account. They didn't contact me, but I noticed them watching my stories, similar username to the last 2 accounts, so I just deactivated all social media accounts. When I reactivated my Instagram weeks later, I made it private, and within a couple of days, I had a follow request from a new account. I declined and reported their page as spam. That night, I received a message from an account with a similar handle as the one I'd reported. They identified themselves as the person who contacted me 7 months ago. By that point, they'd created at least 5 new accounts to check up on me. There were limited people who were aware of my life situation when this all unfolded, and I had countless theories that made me distrust my closest friends. In the end, I narrowed down the possibilities to be an ex-colleague, though I don't know for sure. Long story short, started happening my sophomore year of high school by a kid a year older than me. Mostly able to brush stuff off as coincidence until college. My junior year of college, he started loitering around where the marching band practiced. That summer was hot AF, so pretty much every guy was shirtless and most girls were just in a sports bra. I got a text from an old high school friend that apparently the creep took a pic of me and 2 of the other girls in my section and was passing it around. He was outside of my class buildings. Then one day, I was walking home from class with a friend, and as we got to my block, I saw him a few houses down. I told my friend I needed to go home with her, and called the cops. The cops told me don't go out after dark. It was 4 p.m. and sunny. Fucking useless. During this time, I was working 1 day a month at my job to stay on payroll until summer. He came in once a month, only ever during my shift. That summer it escalated to be about once a week he was coming. My manager hid me every time, though. One evening, it was me and a coworker I hated on second shift. Coworker didn't believe me that Creep had been stalking me. Found out later it was him giving out my schedule. Creep came in. I didn't realize because I was busy with a task on the floor. He grabbed me. Thankfully another customer was there, heard the struggle, and got me free. I reported it to the police the next day. The officer said that the case likely wouldn't go very far, but he'd tell Creep to knock it off. Well, about 10 minutes after I leave the police station, I got a call from my assistant manager asking what the fuck is happening, because Creep showed up to my job with a baseball bat threatening to cave my head in. If there wasn't video, I'd prob not believe the cartoony nature. Cop called about 20 minutes later and told me that Creep was being arrested and charged with a couple different things for things he said to the cop when they had a talk, and the incident at my job. Creep took a deal, judge reamed him out, accepted his guilty plea, but gave him the max sentence for what he pled to, 7 years probation altogether. She also issued a stay-away order because I didn't qualify for a restraining order. You have to have some kind of relationship to get one in PA. He was permabanned by the company I worked for. He showed up one night when my manager was covering a shift. She called the cops. Turned out his buddy he brought with him had a warrant. He was arrested. Creep posted a video to Facebook with my address telling people to kill my cats, and maybe me too. Same friend as before sent me a screen recording and says he reported the video, but wanted to warn me. A few other friends from high school saw it and reached out to make sure I was safe after reporting the video. The recording was turned over to police. He spent a few weeks in jail for violating probation. In law school, he started vandalizing the cat colonies I helped care for. Idiot never stopped to realize we had trail cams set up to monitor the cats and the feeding locations. He tried following me from the location once in his car, but thankfully I know alleys and vacant lots in that area from trapping, and was able to weave to a police station. Cops in that jurisdiction were fucking useless again. So now I'm still looking over my shoulder, unsure of if he knows where I'm living now, when he's going to pop up again. Another story here to share. I just moved out of my parents' house. I was 18, living with a boyfriend. It was a really sketchy apartment complex in a really sketchy area, but it was cheap and I wanted out of my family's house. There were 2 laundry units in the complex, but the one closest to our apartment had had the washers and dryers vandalized, so I would walk or drive our laundry to the other side of the complex. My first time doing laundry, there was a guy there waiting around for his laundry. Being the sort of area it was, I'd already been advised not to leave laundry unattended or it might get stolen. So I waited there with my laundry, happy to have someone else to talk to. He seemed friendly, very chatty. Said he and his wife lived in an apartment really close to that laundry unit. I told him I lived on the other side with my boyfriend. We made conversation, and I felt happy that I'd possibly made a new friend. After a few times of doing my laundry, I realized that he would happen to show up shortly after I did to do his own laundry. At first I figured it was just coincidence. He lived so close by, and everyone's got to do laundry. Then he told me on one of those laundry days, "I saw you bringing your laundry, figured I'd just join you while you wait." He didn't have his own laundry to do, he just showed up because I was there. I thought that was odd, but tried to think of it as him just enjoying being my friend. The next few times, he showed up again without laundry just to talk to me. One day, he showed up again while I was there. It was just us, as it often seemed to be. He started making complaints about his wife. Everyone vents about partners sometimes, he'd done it before. But this time his complaints all seemed to be sexual or affection related. I tried to just give short answers, general replies. I didn't want to leave my laundry unattended. He started getting closer to me. Eventually I was cornered. I nervously laughed, told him he needed to give me some space. Inwardly I was panicking. He pushed me against a washing machine and began forcefully kissing me, groping me. I couldn't push him away. His breath smelled like burnt popcorn, and to this day I can't stand the taste of any popcorn. Someone walked in, and I heard, "Hey, what's going on?" My attacker quickly backed off, said, "Everything's fine." He looked at me and said, "Talk to you later," and left. I was too shocked and embarrassed to say anything to this random new person. I gathered my still damp clothes and left. After that, I started taking our laundry to a laundromat away from the complex. It was more work and more expensive, but I didn't want to see the guy. Again, out of embarrassment and shame, I didn't tell my boyfriend. I just made some excuse about the apartment laundry machines being shit. I didn't see the laundry guy for a while. He didn't know which apartment I lived in, just that I was on the opposite side of the complex. One day I was home alone, and I heard a knock on the door. I looked out the blinds, and it was him. He knocked again, waited a little longer, then left. Somehow he found out where I was, probably saw my car. After that, though, I never saw or heard from him again. I'd gotten a different vehicle not long after that, so maybe he figured I'd moved. So I was in like 9th or 10th grade, and I went to this small little punk show at a coffee shop a few towns over from where I lived. I can't remember who approached who first, but this girl and I started talking. She seemed cool, and at the end of the show we exchanged numbers and then parted ways. This was before cell phones were popular and texting didn't exist. So it started off with her calling me every day on the house phone. Sometimes I'd be busy. I also played soccer year-round and played and trained like 6/7 days a week. And she'd get angry I'd be too busy to talk to her. Eventually this got annoying, and since we had caller ID, I just started ignoring her calls. Then she started in with calling from blocked or different numbers. By then I told her I wasn't interested and told her to kick rocks. She cried and told me she loved me, despite us only meeting once and talking on the phone a few times for probably less than an HR each time. Eventually I told my parents to only answer calls from numbers they recognized, but this girl kept calling so much my parents changed our number. At that point I thought I was finally done her. So flash forward a few weeks, and I'm taking a train into the city, and guess what? She just so happens to pop up on my train car. I was pissed and moved cars, and she just kept following me, and crying it was so weird. She followed me off the train, and said all she wanted to do was hang out with me. I told her to shove off, and if she didn't I told her my parents, and I had talked about getting the police involved. This really seemed to piss her off, but she finally walked off. Flash forward to summer, and my summer job all through high school, I was a lifeguard. One day I walk into work and we have a new hire and, you guessed it, it was this girl. I finally went to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. Back then I didn't have call logs or texts to prove I was being stalked. I spoke to my employer and told them about the issue, and they said they essentially couldn't fire her, but would put us on different shifts. After a while she must have caught on to this. She started spending all of her time at the pool on and off the clock. Again, there was little my job could do, so she would creepily stare at me and try to talk to me while I was doing my job. I was miserable, and this girl was chasing away girls I was friends with and telling people at work we were in a relationship. It was so terrible. Eventually I confronted her and said some really mean things, but I was tired of her. Eventually she learned from someone at work where I lived. She would sit outside on the sidewalk and just wait for me to come out to go to school or practice or work and just act insane. She would cry and scream and ask why I just wouldn't love her back, etc. She sat outside my house like clockwork. Since we were minors, my parents decided to call the police on her because she was clearly not going to school. The police approached her a few times, but she would still sit outside, but now she was hiding in bushes or trees. At one point I got really depressed and was worried I'd never be able to get this girl to leave me alone, and my parents started having real conversations about moving to get away from her, as the police still were unwilling to help. I was so entrenched at school with my friends and sports and was so devastated. Eventually my grandmother loaned us money to hire a private investigator to follow her around and create an opportunity to watch her and prove the pattern of stalking. Pictures upon pictures of her sitting outside our house at all hours. One day I planned to go visit a friend and didn't see her outside and thought maybe I had gotten lucky that day and she just wasn't around. So I step out of my front door and start walking in the direction of my friend's house. Out of nowhere she steps out from behind a car and everything was a blur from there. She attacked me. She was trying to punch me and scratch me, and while I don't remember a whole lot about her attacking me, I got lucky, and someone called the police after seeing us fighting. The police showed up, and of course I was taken into custody despite my injuries. I was taken to the station, and was able to get the arresting officers to let me speak to the detective who had been working with me, but never was willing to charge this girl. My parents showed up with the investigator we had hired, and all the evidence was shown to the police. They finally, after almost a year, finally found the girl, and charged her with stalking. I had to go to court, and I finally saw the parents of this girl. By this time I was a junior in high school, and she had been disrupting my life for almost a year and a half. Eventually she accepted a plea which required her to receive mental health help, and was put on probation. She was no longer allowed to intrude on my life, and my nightmare was finally over. I went off to college, and would have terrible nightmares that she had found me there too. After a few years I stopped looking over my shoulder, and was able to move on, but it was a deeply disturbing time for me. People often think stalking is something that only happens in adulthood, but it is rampant during teen years, and often the justice system overlooks this behavior as just kids acting out. Stalking laws have gotten so much better, and with technology the way it is today, it's so much easier to prove. I hope no one has to deal with a situation like this. A story to add on here. Was at work, new guy. A few months and a girl took a liking to me when I had helped her with something. She seemed cool, so I thought it would be cool to make friends with her since I was newer around there. We only hung out in group settings, so there was no questionable 1:1 things going on. One night she kissed me, and I kinda just told her that I do like hanging out with her and just need some time to think about things before considering moving forward, 'cause I just wasn't expecting that. She looked angry rather than sad, but didn't make a scene. Flash forward to the next day at work, and she seemed back to normal, no anger or weirdness, so it was all good. Then after work we're all walking out as a group, and I'm talking to her about how I have a new manager, and she blurts out that they are childhood best friends, and that she'll put in a good word for me. That night, the weird threatening texts begin about how she's gonna ruin my career if I don't give us a chance, and 20-year-old me was stupid enough to not go right to HR. I didn't really plan to give us a chance, but felt unsafe detaching from the friend group. 2 days go by, and I find out she's telling everyone that we are together. And everyone was all for it without ever really confirming with me, and I started feeling super trapped. For days, she was texting me about how we'll be taking her away for the weekend and make our first date such a big thing. That is until about 4 days after that I'm in a meeting with my boss, and he goes, "Who's that girl that keeps skulking around by your cubicle?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he points out the window area, and there she is watching my cubicle. Me instantly realizing he has no clue who she is. I hand him my phone and go, "Apparently not your childhood best friend after all." He reads the messages, walks over to her and chases her away, then walks me to HR. She was ordered to stay away from me while they investigated, and the next day she came in with bandages all over her face and spread a rumor that I did it. For a few days everyone believed her, until someone mentioned the timelines didn't match up because when she claimed I did it, I was working a security gig at a concert he went to. She was fired after that. Had a couple of years of fallout after that because, I'm a 6'1" male, so we don't get instantly believed in those scenarios, but I survived it. I was 16 years old and in my senior year of high school. I had known a guy who was 21 years old at the time that I had met through mutual friends when I was 14, and he was around 18 or 19. We weren't close, but he would sometimes show up when all of us were hanging out. The moment I turned 16, he started showing an interest in me and talking to me on Facebook more and wanting to hang out one-on-one. Where I live, 16 years old is the age of consent and even get married. I wasn't very comfortable with it, and I let him know. At that point, he started getting very pushy and aggressive, saying things like, "You're not that pretty anyways, and you'll never find anyone as good as me." He also would threaten to hurt me. At that point, I told him that I was done with his shit, and if he came near me that I would call the police. I ended up blocking him on all social media. He then started to come to my house and leave little gifts behind. The first one was a fake rose that was stabbed into our front lawn. He would also leave bags of candy on the porch. After this, thing started to escalate drastically, and my parents were 100% aware of this. The day before Halloween at 7 a.m., he showed up at my house and knocked on the door. My mother answered the door to be greeted by him. He gave her a gift basket and told her to give it to me. I became very fearful and had a strong feeling that he was going to hang around that morning in anticipation that I would walk to school. For context, I walked to school alone every day because my parents forced me to, and no other kids from my school lived in the same neighborhood. I asked my mother if she would drive me because I was afraid he would be outside, but she refused and told me I was being paranoid. Lo and behold, I hadn't walked more than 10 feet away from my house, and there he was crossing the street towards me. I immediately turned around and booked it back home on the verge of tears because of how scared I was. He was screaming for me, saying, "I just want to talk." I got back inside and told my mother. I pleaded to her to call the police, but she refused. Her response broke me and made me feel helpless and unsafe. She said, "And what are they going to do about it? There's nothing I can do, and they won't do anything. Just go to school and deal with it." She offered to drive me halfway to school because she didn't want to make the full 5-minute drive. She drove me 2 blocks down and dropped me off at a park that was somewhat close to my school. I crossed through this park every day to get to school. I was still very fearful that he would be there because he knew my route that I walked. She told me to walk fast if I was so scared. Started to jog across the park, and I looked behind me to see him just standing there and staring at me. I started sprinting as fast as I could, but I was lucky he didn't follow me. When I got to school, I told everyone that I could. My friends, some of my teachers, and my counselor, but nobody seemed to care. Only one of friends was kind enough to give me a ride when he could, but our friendship didn't last long, because he saw my dire situation as a way to hook up with me. After that day, my mental health plummeted, and I developed severe paranoia. I didn't want to go outside anymore, and I struggled to walk to school every day. He would often carve our initials around the park, so I would see, and he would wait outside my school across the street in a public area after I got out. I ended up taking different routes that would make my walk go from 30 minutes to 1 hour and a half because I was scared for my life. This went on for almost the entire school year until I was able to get my first car, which I am so grateful for. No thanks to anyone, as nobody helped me. All of my support systems failed me, and no one seemed to care. I didn't have a phone to call the police when he was actively stalking me, and at the time I wasn't educated enough to know that I could call a non-emergency line to start a case. I was basically told that there was nothing anyone could do, and I needed to just deal with it and hope I don't get murdered or raped. It's been 10 years, and I am still full of resentment and hatred. Nobody did anything to help me. I suffer from a lot of PTSD and paranoia now because of it. My cousin had a similar experience. I was just talking about this with my boyfriend earlier today. I don't know if it really counts as a stalker since it didn't carry on, but it felt like it at the time, so. Anyway, I had this friend, who we'll call Bob. Bob's a year or two younger than me. Also, I'm a woman, and I'd known him most of my life. He's mostly been a good guy, and he asked me out a few times even after I politely turned him down in high school. I hadn't seen him around in a while when this happened, and I later found out that he was pretty heavily into drugs and hanging with a bad crowd during this time. This happened a few years ago, when I was around 22 to 23. I was walking home one summer day, and about 4 houses away from my house, Bob pulls up in a car, facing the opposite direction, away from my house. The minute he rolls down his window, I already know something's wrong. Bob isn't himself. He's raising every alarm bell and bad vibe in my body. I can't put my finger on it, but something is telling me to get away from him. Bob starts offering me a ride home. My house is right there, and he's going the opposite way, so already WTF. And when I refuse, he gets aggressive and starts demanding and swearing at me. Just get in the fucking car now. I keep refusing, trying to walk away, but now he's driving in reverse, following me and still demanding. Finally, he has to drive away because another car comes and he's blocking the road. I book it home and call my BF, who shows up minutes later to check on me. As I'm standing on the front stoop replaying what happened, I look up the street, and there's fucking Bob's car, sitting at the stop sign, facing my house, just idling. After a minute or so, he turns down the street and is out of sight. Not 5 minutes later, here comes Bob cruising real slow up the street on the opposite side of my house. We live in a tiny town, so the blocks aren't very big. Just a few minutes after that, Bob comes down the gravel turnoff across the street from my house and pulls up right in front of BF and I. BF immediately goes off on him, telling him to leave me the fuck alone because I'm obviously freaked out. But Bob insists he's not doing anything wrong and just wants to talk to me, and again tries to get me to join him at Slash in the car. They get in a shouting match, and I just go in my house and lock the doors. Bob eventually leaves, and BF makes sure I'm okay before heading home. Well, maybe an hour or so after BF was gone, who should come knocking on my front door? Fucking B.O.B. I see him through the front window and immediately tell my gran, who by now has heard the whole story. And she, being the 70-plus-year-old disabled tank that she is, met Bob at the door with an instant threat of calling the police if he didn't leave me alone. Bob still insists he just wants to talk to me, that he didn't mean to scare me, and keeps asking if I can come outside with him. Gran finally chases him off after ripping into him for making me feel unsafe and terrified, and I'm left shaken by the whole ordeal. I later learned Bob also tried cornering me by dropping into my BF's mom's pet shop, knowing that I sometimes helped her out, but was met only by my 6 feet 4 inches, 250-plus LBS, very pissed off, and very protective boyfriend, and his even bigger, just as pissed off, and possibly even more protective older brother. They won't tell me exactly what they said Slash did, but Bob never looked for me in the pet shop again. Bob never tried approaching me after that, but I spent a good 2 to 3 weeks looking over my shoulder for him. I quit going anywhere alone for a good long while, and I all but stopped walking anywhere. Bob's doing better now, from what I hear, but I'd still never go anywhere alone with him. So, I lived in a small Midwestern town at this time with my grandparents. When it began, I was 21, my sister, who lived with us, was 20, and my then GF was 22, and spent a lot of time at the house with us. It began when my GF and I had gone for a drive, and she pulled up on the curb to drop me off before driving home. There were 3 or 4 trees on one side of the house, and I saw the silhouette of a man standing in the tree line. Stocky, tall, and wearing a ball cap. I sat in the car, tinted windows, so he couldn't see us, for a while, before deciding to just sprint to the front door and tell my grandparents someone was creeping in the yard. My grandpa told me that one of my friends had just left the house, drunk, and maybe stopped in the tree line to pee. He could get home through our backyard. I didn't think it looked like him, but I had a history of being a little paranoid, so I let it go. The next time he was seen, about a week later I think, I was up late alone, on my computer in the living room. My favorite recliner sat in front of, but facing away from, a big picture window with sheer curtains that sat directly over the long driveway. I got out of my chair to get something to drink, and saw something out the window from the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, I saw a stocky, tall man wearing a ball cap running down the driveway to the street. I went and woke up my grandpa, but he thought it might have been one of his renters. The man in question was socially inappropriate, and had a history of doing weird stuff. A few months previously, he had come to our house and taken my grandpa's truck. He always left the keys in the vehicles, because grandpa had lent it to him once, so he thought it was okay. I didn't think it looked like him either, but again, history of paranoia, so. Next time he was at the house was just 2 days later. Again up late, on my computer, in my favorite recliner. The living room shared a wall with the attached garage. I heard some noises in the garage, but thought a raccoon or a squirrel had gotten in. Then I heard a human cough. I audibly gasped and ran to wake Grandpa. He got his gun, ran to the garage, and saw nothing. This time he scolded me. I had a habit of reading/watching scary things while staying up late. He thought I had worked myself up. He did lock the doors from the garage to outside, though. I talked to my sister. Her bedroom was in the basement, and she said her dog had been acting strangely. He was a very well-behaved boy, friendly towards everyone and pretty much everything. But she was hearing weird noises here and there outside her window, and when she did, her dog was growling. She thought it was strange, but thought that maybe he was just overprotective at night. She didn't see anything, after all. When I told her what I'd experienced, she agreed to keep a closer eye on things. The next time, my GF was staying the night at my house, about a week and a half later. I told her about what had happened, but she thought my sister and I were being dramatic. Bad things don't happen here, was the general consensus. Whenever she stayed, she liked to open the bedroom window over the backyard to let the breeze in as she slept. I begged her not to this night, and after some back and forth, she agreed. When I fell asleep, though, she opened it anyway. She woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't figure out why. She rolled over in bed and found herself face to face with a stocky, tall man wearing a ball cap, stood right outside my bedroom window and staring in. She yelled out, jumped up and shut the window, and I ran to wake Grandpa again. My sister was still awake, heard my GF, and came upstairs to see what was going on. She said her dog had been growling again. Grandpa took his gun and went outside. He found muddy footprints outside of both mine and my sister's bedroom windows. But my grandma talked him out of calling the cops, stating he was a peeping Tom, and that it was harmless. We should just make sure we weren't undressed in front of unobscured windows. My grandpa did, though essentially set a curfew for my sister, my GF, and I. He agreed to wait up each night until everyone who would be there was home. We didn't see or hear from him for some time after that. We thought we were safe. We weren't. About 2 weeks after the window incident, my sister and I were up late studying. We decided we were hungry, and there was no junk food in the house, so we were going to drive to the local McDonald's. We took her dog with us because she often bought him his own chicken nuggets, and he loved car rides. We got home, pulled into the driveway, and finished the song we were listening to. Then we decided to go inside. As we were walking up the long driveway, Diesel leading the way, then my sister, then me, I heard behind me what sounded like footsteps stepping on crunchy leaves. Before I could turn around, Diesel started snarling and growling and jumped behind me. My sister yelled, "Run!" And we did. I could hear Diesel snarling behind me and the sound of the footsteps picking up. We got onto the steps and my sister yelled for the dog, getting him inside and locking the door, but not before my sister saw a tall, stocky man wearing a ball cap trying to kick Diesel. We sat at the kitchen table, crying, trying to catch our breath. Diesel was not catching his, though. He kept running into the living room, growling, and running back to the kitchen to check on us. My sister woke Grandpa, and he called the cops. The man was gone by then, but the cops agreed to patrol the area. Thank God that was the end. We never saw or heard from him again, but it still freaks me out to be out and about after dark at my grandparents'. Another story to add. This is a bit heavy for me, but I'll tell you all anyway. I won't mince words. I was sexually harassed and subsequently raped by my roommate. I'll refer to him going forward, Kirk. At that time, I had a decent job, but without warning would up getting laid off. Jobless, my landlord immediately evicted me the moment he found out I lost my job. Not getting into that, Kirk was a friend of a friend I had been talking to throughout the entire ordeal. This friend informs me Kirk is in need of a roommate to help with rent. I was told if I could get unemployment set up, then Kirk would take me in for a few months until Kirk would be able to find a more long-term roomie. I managed to get that unemployment not long after, and took Kirk up on his offer. Suddenly everybody warned me about Kirk. Some of the claims of his antics were absolutely wild, and I wasn't sure I could believe one man did all these things. It was everything from art theft from online artists, stalking, drug use/distribution, blackmail, and a ton of sex offenses. I really had no options, so I took that chance despite the warnings. The day I moved in, Kirk approached me from behind, naked. He was erect and slowly stroking himself. I asked what he was doing, and he said he was undressing me in his mind before he did the real thing. I asked him what he meant, and he tells me he intends to make having sex with him was required to continue living there. I told him I already had a boyfriend, and he'd be moving in too in a couple of days. Kirk tells me my boyfriend wasn't there then, and beggars can't be choosers. He gave me my options. Have sex with him, and I'd get to stay. Refuse, and then pack up to leave. Refuse, but attempt to stay. In the event of this choice, he'd physically beat me into submission, and do it anyway. It was among the worst moments in my life. Period. Weeks go by, but I eventually managed to escape from that hellhole. That was when the stalking started. The first of it was when my mail got sent to his house by mistake rather than my new address. It was my cable bill. Kirk, convinced that he was me, and canceled my cable. Then the calls came. They'd come at like 3 a.m., and he'd do the whole, "Did you think you'd be safe? I know where you are." Even more alarming was he somehow found out where I had started working. He showed up, asking for me constantly, hoping the managers would buy that he was my boyfriend. They didn't, and gave Kirk nothing. Finally, he appeared one afternoon, leaning on the side of my car, waiting for me. I called the police, and informed him of the situation from within the store where Kirk wouldn't see me. It worked, and he wound up being arrested for a bunch of charges. I was asked to come into the station the next day to give a formal statement. It was only after that the investigator told me that a bunch of those rumors that I'd been told were quite true, and that he'd been running from the authorities for a while. My call pinned his location. In the end, he earned several years in prison for all of it. I thought it was over, but to my utter shock it wasn't. Much like the fictional Freddy Krueger's backstory, Kirk was released super early due to an investigative screw-up. I found out that someone had broken the chain of possession, and the evidence that was the backbone of the prosecution had to be thrown out, and as such he was released. Several months later, my husband, roommates, and 2 mutual friends all attended a convention in Seattle. I was that convention's security lead, and I had a little desk in one of the hotel's rented offices. Lo and behold, in walks Kirk. "Did you think you were safe here either?" I immediately called my other security guys to have him escorted out of the hotel and con. My good employees managed to get him out, but also called the police for me. It wasn't as if there weren't any of my officers near my office, so all were willing to testify as witnesses. In yet another twist, after Kirk's arrest, I once more was called in, along with my officers, to give another statement as well as to look over the restraining order I'd had placed on him a while back. When we all were done, I left to finish working the con before finally heading home to decompress from all that trauma. Presently, he's still in prison.